Okay. What this is, this is going to be, as you'll see from this picture here, it's going to be, I'm not going to make any, fantastic, fantastic conclusions. I'm not going to come out with crackpot theories or anything else. It's just purely going to be some recollections and reflections based on people that Linda and I have met. How we got to meet these, this is our display at an event we used to attend called Autographica. And it was, as the name implies, a big show. They used to hold them at the NEC in Birmingham and at various hotels around Heathrow. And the idea was that they would bring famous people along for a weekend and you could spend time. One of the rooms was called the Astronaut Encounter Room. And because at the time, Linda and I were the only people in Britain selling bits of flown spacecraft, you can see they're all here that we used to frame up, we was invited to sit in the astronaut room. So we spent 3 days and 3 nights in a luxury hotel with a variety of famous astronauts. Everyone here, apart from him, that's a Mercury. That's the only Mercury astronaut I've ever met. Mercury was the one-man spacecraft that put the first Americans in space in 1961 through to 64. And that's Malcolm Scott Carpenter. He's the only Mercury astronaut we've ever met. All the others are Apollo astronauts, and you might recognize them. That's Buzz Aldrin, Alan Bean, that's my favorite, Edgar Mitchell there. He's a great guy, Dick Gordon. And my brother Rob has come to a few of these events and met them. And you meet them socially, and you also meet them, in our case, because we're sat next to them for all the time, but you can also have breakfast with them, just wander down the room. So over the years, we spent a lot of time with these guys. So what this is just basically, because I've always been interested in the UFO phenomenon, and I know that, and I knew at the time that a lot of these guys were, it was an opportunity just to chat to them off the record, and that's what this is. So the object of this little talk, which I hope you enjoy, is to address some of these thoughts. Firstly, the fact that, I've come to the conclusion, and that's from talking to these people and pilots as well, that the reality of the UFO phenomenon was known to NASA, or NACA as it was before then, before manned spaceflight began. They were already aware of the thing and were taking it seriously before Alan Shepard flew into space in 1961. Also, that US and Soviet astronauts had been told to expect that they would encounter EBEs, is what NASA calls. They don't say aliens; they say extraterrestrial biological entities, and they were told to expect that. So it was a possibility. There's also the thought came up in a few conversations that the presence of EBEs on the moon has been a factor in not just America but Russian exploration of space to some extent. I mean, if you knew that you were going to a planet, the moon, where you may or may not be assured of a warm welcome, it would affect your thinking, wouldn't it? And it is suggested by people this continues to dictate current US spaceflight strategy. This all begins back in the late 50s, early 60s. I think it's the most wonderful aircraft ever built, the North American X-15. It's a rocket-powered plane, which, if the American Air Force had received the funding, would have put Americans in space, and with the more powerful version, it's actually into orbit long before Gagarin and Shepard. An incredible vehicle. And I think I'm right, I think it was 5. 5 of the pilots actually achieved astronauts' wings by flying above 50 miles altitude. Now, in public, one of the most famous of the X-15 pilots, Joseph Walker, as you can see, he actually reported, that he actually reported that isn't it lovely how you get all these things you don't want from AVG? Right, go away. Right, he actually reported that he'd been specifically asked to look out for detect UFOs and that he'd videoed them. It's a frustrating thing is, that there's a lot of these famous pilots, cosmonauts, astronauts, are quite candid about having taken photographs and videos, but they just never surfaced. And I think it's a great quote. I don't feel like speculating. All I know is what appeared on the film, which was developed after the flight, and other subsequent pilot. Robert White, unfortunately, I think was killed flying the X-15, but he reported one. And again, you know, the most famous person who flew the X-15, believe it or not, was Neil Armstrong. Before he transferred to NASA, he flew the NACA Air Force. He flew the X-15, and he also reported anomalous objects while he was up there. This is just really going through, and we can have a chat about it, or you can just, it might be things that you've never come across. This is a very common experience for when you talk to these guys, that they may not necessarily feel at liberty to talk about things they saw during their space missions, but they'll talk about things they saw when they were pilots in the forces. And Donald Slayton, was one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, the first 7 Americans chosen to travel into space on their own in a single man capsule. And he was found to have a heart murmur and didn't fly in Mercury eventually. But later on, he became head of the astronaut office and picked himself to fly on the very last Apollo mission, the Apollo-Soyuz joint mission. But he reports a very familiar, he was flying a P-51 Mustang here, and he was vectored in by radar on fighter control onto an object. Initially, he thought it was a kite. How to get a kite 10,000 feet? But eventually, you know, he saw this thing and had the classic UFO. And it's amazing how many of these Gordon Cooper, he was the last human being, I think, or no, certainly the last American anyway, to travel into space on his own. He was the last orbital flight of the Mercury capsule. And so whatever else these guys had, there's some tremendous guts, if you think about it, to actually go into space on your own in something smaller than a phone box. And in his case, he was up there for quite a long time, you know, incredible courage. But again, he, as we'll see in a second, he's got recollections based on his time working at Edwards Air Force Base. But he did say, he said he frequently saw UFOs just after the war when he was flying he flew a P-51 too. And he actually took part in a United Nations debate about the UFO phenomenon, which strongly came to the conclusion it was a genuine phenomenon. It was a real, it wasn't just optical illusions or mirages, and he was actually one of the people that spoke at it. He also eventually admitted to having seen a glowing green shape. His description matches very closely, as we'll see later on, something that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and Mike Collins said they'd seen on their Apollo 11 mission. But this one, the interesting thing about Cooper's sighting on his final orbit was that this object, whatever it was picked up by the tracking station in Australia. So it's almost a perfect thing, isn't it, really? A visual observation followed by a radar confirmation from a ground station. Okay, this is Cooper's own account. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the video, the audio.
Not as such.
This was at Edwards. No sound. Oh, Linda says there's no sound coming through, unfortunately. But basically, he was supervising filming of a new approach and landing area to Edwards Air Force Base. And the camera crew filmed a classic flying saucer landing on the base, on the runway. As he, you know, as he said later, it was frustrating that once the film had been sent off, it never resurfaced. If you type my, and don't, but if you were to type my name into Google, put David Bryant UFO, you'll find a whole flood of absolute garbage, which I'm supposed to have said about this, the Black Knight object. I was interviewed over the phone by, I think it was the Daily Mail, and but every other word I said, they reported, but they added a few of their own. But the truth of the matter is, in you come, Scott. You haven't missed much, Scott, don't worry. Okay, so the Black Knight was the name given to, well, it was the name of a British, the last decent British missile that we ever made on our own steam, Blue Streak and the Black Knight. But it was a name given to an object detected by the American Air Defense System. Now, this was in 1960, and it was a polar orbit is quite difficult to achieve for all kinds of logistical reasons. This thing was detected by the Americans and the Russians and commented upon and logged. And it was, you know, at a time when neither nation was capable of putting orbit spacecraft or satellites into high polar orbits. And it's been seen on numerous occasions and filmed by amateur astronomers, etc., etc. Okay, so if we start going through, this is not me showing off. It's just anybody can say they've, I've heard it from, and the internet is full of people claiming to have heard this, that, and the other, and they've, so and so said this and said that. So with these people, since I've met them, I think it's just to add a little verisimilitude to what they told me. Scott Carpenter is a fascinating character. I'm going to chuck a few anecdotes as we go along. Scott Carpenter was the second American to orbit the Earth. And he told me with complete candor that UFOs was the reason he never flew in space again. And I said, how's that then? And then he said this thing, and he knew for a fact at that time that no astronaut, American astronaut, had ever been in space alone. They're always surveilled by UFOs. I thought, what, really? He said, yeah, that's absolutely true. And he believes it's the case till today. So I said, how did that account for you losing your status as an astronaut? And it's quite basic. He was, I think he was only up for very few orbits. He followed John Glenn. So he was up for a few orbits. And at some point he found himself looking at a very bright light, which apparently had formated with his Aurora 7 spacecraft. And in manoeuvring to try and obtain some photographs of it or to watch it, he used up a lot of his manoeuvring jet fuel. And when it came time to re-enter, you have to turn the capsule around to present the heat shield. He'd actually used up so much, he couldn't put the thing in the proper aspect for the re-entry that had been planned. And he overshot the re-entry point or the landing point by several thousand miles. And he was, sort of put on the carpet afterwards and told in no uncertain terms he wasn't up there to sightsee. And he said, he told me exactly what, and that I had the feeling he felt they either didn't believe him or they didn't want him to talk about it. But that's his story. If you move later on, we'll move from look at the Apollo missions. The Apollo astronauts are very, very chary about what they may or may not have seen, and some of you know I have my own reservations about some of the accounts. But back in the 70s, a guy wrote this book, which we'll see in a minute, in which he'd found on various NASA. Don't forget, before the Apollo landings, the Americans had the Ranger and Surveyor spacecraft and also lunar orbiter spacecraft photographing the moon, looking for suitable landing sites. And some of those photographs that were obtained definitely seemed to show structures of some kind. These are all from NASA website. This thing here has been referred to, it's been photographed by a Russian lunar spacecraft as well. or just letting somebody else in. It's usually referred to as either the shard or the spire, but it's been photographed, as I say, several times, and it isn't an artifact. It actually does cast a shadow. I mean, as to what it is, I've no idea. Neither does anybody else, really. Now, I know rocks and boulders have been photographed, you know, with trackways behind them in Death Valley and things like that. These are photographs from this book that we'll see in a second. But it's curious. I mean, the moon is supposed to be seismically inactive. There's no atmosphere. There's certainly no water. Well, there certainly wasn't water. You know, there hasn't been water for millennia or billions of years. And yet you can see these rocks, and they're big rocks. They're not small, or objects, whatever they are. And they don't all look necessarily like natural rocks. But these things, these trackways are hundreds and hundreds of meters long. And again, nobody's been able to come up with a successful or a credible reason for how a rock with a mass of several hundred kilograms could move along the surface of the moon by itself. But, it's not to suggest that any alien or EB has done that. I mean, why would they spend their time pushing rocks? But if you look at this thing here and some of them, they don't look, you know, completely natural. This is a structure inside a small crater. And you know, it looks like one of Alan Shepard's golf balls, doesn't it? But again, it'd be difficult to come up with an explanation of how this apparent. It has been suggested, you know, by the how can we put this? By the slightly more credulous, that this is a geodesic dome of some sort. But it's certainly an unusual structure. This book. If you want to buy a copy, you'll find it costs you £50 or £60 for a really dog-eared paperback. Luckily, I've had mine since it first came out. It's fascinating. It's full of literally hundreds of photos of that sort. Apollo 7, they were quite a, there's no other way of putting this really, they were quite a bitter crew of astronauts. Those of you who saw the previous broadcast about the Apollo missions and the ins and outs of those will know that they were in Earth orbit only. They flew into Earth orbit, and they got very frustrated by being asked to do this and do that and do this and do that when they were trying to do. And mostly they wanted them to do broadcasts for schools and broadcasts for publicity, and in the end they weren't very well. They all had bad colds. In the end, they just said, no, we won't. And they just turned off the cameras and said, we're going to go to sleep for 6 hours, and then we're going to wake up and do the work we've been paid to do. And so they were, you know, basically they never flew in space again. Well, but this object here was photographed from Apollo 7, and of course it has a lot in common with that the thing we saw right at the start, the Black Knight. You know, I asked Cunningham about it when I met him, you know, what his opinion. God, look at that hair I used to have, dear me, like Leo Sayer or something. Anyway, and he said that, it's quite a funny quote, he said, the idea that we're alone in the cosmos is inconceivable. They all say that. And any logical person with the knowledge of the size of the cosmos and the number of planets and stars with planets would agree. Anyway, I asked him about this photo that was taken on the mission. And he said, it's junk, that's all, it's just junk. And I said, who's junk? Kind of jokingly. And he looked at me really seriously. So, well, that's the question. You know, so he was almost kind of tipping me the wink. But that photograph, it doesn't look like a piece of junk very close to the camera, does it? It looks like something fairly large, fairly distant away. It looks like a space shuttle, but of course it was long time before the shuttle. Jim McDivitt is a hoot. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met, and I've never met anybody who can drink as much of him without slurring his words or falling over. I actually watched him drink 2 bottles of gin one night. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Yeah, it was gin. Gin and tonic, gin and martini. And he was a general, you know, in the forces. But he flew Apollo missions and an Apollo mission and the Gemini mission. This photograph, he confirmed to me, was the one that Ed Wyatt, his Gemini crew partner, obtained during the Gemini 4 mission, okay? And he said they were large, they were some distance away, and they were leaving glowing trails, okay? But these photos were suppressed for a long time. They were very hard to get hold of. And he said that they were far too close together in those days. I mean, I know we've got Skytrain and all that now, but these were far too far away, far too close together to be anything launched by NASA or Roscom. Now Aldrin, he's a strange character, Aldrin. In private, I'll tell you, you very quickly become aware of the fact that he is a firm believer in the UFO phenomenon. Not only that, he firmly believes that EBEs have visited Earth in the past, present, and the future. He's written 2 books on the subject, 2 works of fiction on the subject as well, you know. But in public, he plays a straight bat, as it were. And there's a lot of misinformation and scuttlebutt online about the Apollo 11 mission and what the astronauts saw, which just I don't believe, and they will not confirm any of that. But one thing they will confirm is shortly after their cislunar burn, which is when they leave Earth orbit to travel towards the moon, they suddenly found they were being paralleled by he described it as like a green L-shaped cylinder. He said, in other words, nothing like anything ever launched from Earth. So it was like kind of boomerang shaped, cylindrical, and glowing green. And as you can see from the thing here, they had a brief chat about it. And you can actually hear online, if you watch the video of it, Mike Collins says, he doesn't say, we've got a UFO outside here. He says, Capcom, Cap's communicator, can you give us this location of our S4B stage? That's the top stage of the Saturn. And Capcom confirmed it was 6,000 kilometers away. So they knew it wasn't that. They also knew, needless to say, that there was nothing, you know, it's like there was an agreement to put nothing in the potential path of a manned launch. Everybody knew when they were going to happen. So, you know, nothing was launched that might interfere with that. And when I asked him about it, you know, he said, oh, well, I'll tell you what we did. We turned the mics off and we sat and had a conversation. And I said, are we going to tell them about it? And Collins said, if you remember what happened on a couple of the Gemini missions, one of the Gemini missions, they had a leak of nitrogen tetroxide into the cabin, which made them go a bit doolally, and they shortened the mission because they were worried. He said they'll either think we're inhaling some kind of noxious gas if we report to an UFO, or they think we've gone bonkers, or they'll think that the Russians have put something up and we're at risk, or they'll think it's a UFO and we're at risk. In any case, we won't get to go to the moon. So I think we just should say nothing. And Armstrong, who was the mission commander, he said, right, agreed then. And he said Armstrong just pulled down the screen so they couldn't see it. And he said later on when they had to open they had these kind of blinds. He said, later on when we rolled back the blind, it had gone. He said, but it was real. So that's, you know, now Dick Gordon met him several times. Unfortunately, like a lot of these guys, he's passed away now. He had he did a Gemini mission with actually an Apollo mission too, with one of the most charismatic and amazing pilots and astronauts of them all, Pete Conrad. There are loads of anecdotes I could tell you about him. Just the funniest bloke, and he was. He's like a grammar school boy going to Cambridge or something. He was very much, you know, put in his place by all the others, and you know, very early on in the selection. And he walked out of the Mercury selection process. It was only later on he was invited back in because he was just the best part. Have you ever seen the film The Right Stuff, where they have Gordon Cooper? When everybody says to him, who's the best pilot you ever saw, Gordon Cooper always says, you're looking at him, kid. In fact, that was Pete Conrad's line, but they left it out of the film because he was dead by then. But he and Dick Gordon said that they'd seen and photographed a strange, obviously structured object, and it was very close, you know, half a kilometre away. And they said it definitely wasn't. NASA told them they were looking at the Proton 3, and they said it definitely wasn't. It was far too big and far too structured and too unusual. I had the privilege of sitting having dinner with him on one occasion, and he signed everything for me, as you can see. And one of the other guys at the dinner had got this photograph, and he said, you know, was this what it looked like? And Gordon said, yeah, that's exactly what it looked like. And he said, well, would you sign that? And he did, without any demur. He said, that's exactly what it looked like. That's him doing I think that's Ed White doing an EVA there. Ed White, by the way, was one of the 3 astronauts killed in the Apollo capsule fire. Now, you're not about to hear this. I'll try it, but can you hear that, Lynn? No, you can't hear it. Well, this is basically, for some reason, it won't let you play video clips for some reason, audio clips. But this is Jim Lovell from Apollo 13. And he and Frank Borman, another very charismatic and interesting person, again, reported, as you may know if you watch enough old war films, the sort of parlance for an unidentified or potentially hostile craft in the forces is a bogey. And you don't know why it's not playing on here, but he reported a bogey on the Apollo 12 mission, and they weren't messing about on the Apollo 8 mission, Gemini 12 mission, whatever. And he, you know, I asked him about it. He said, no, we weren't being funny. You know, it was just, we were just reporting there was something above us and in front of us that we didn't know what it was. We could see the top stage of the Titan II. It wasn't that, you know. Okay, this is Al Worden. He said he'd never actually had any personal experience of seeing a UFO in space or anywhere else, but he's quite happy to give me this quote. So I think it's a bit bizarre, really. I think we may be a combination of creatures that lived here on Earth in the past and creatures that visited us from somewhere else. It sounds a bit like Eric von Daniken, doesn't it? I'm convinced we're the result of that particular union thousands of years ago. And he really does belittle. Well, he doesn't believe anything now. He's passed away again, sadly. But he really did believe that. He's a guy Linda and I have met, I don't know, 8 or 10 times, I think. And got quite friendly with him to the extent he actually was, you know, quite chatty and flirty. And with Linda. Gene Cernan, again, he's unfortunately, as we go through, I find myself having to keep saying, unfortunately, he has passed away. The point is, all these famous astronauts from the Gemini, Mercury, Apollo days, I mean, they're all in their late 80s, 90s, they're all dropping like flies. So, to some extent, unless you actually met, I know some of you watching this did meet these guys, you have to take my word for it, but he, as he said, he said it several times to me, and he said it in public. He believed the UFOs are real and that they come from something. And I said, do you ever see one? And he said, not me personally, you know. Well, do you know of other astronauts? He said, if they want to tell you about it, they will do. These are NASA videos. They were so frequent in their during their moon mission. They were so frequently encountered UFOs. They had a nickname for them. So they didn't have, so you couldn't hear them in real time broadcast saying, we have a UFO, you know, we've got, they called them moon pigeons in the same way as Lovell referred to that one as a bogey. If I click this, the thing to watch out for is this here is what's called the high gain antenna, which was used for actually achieving docking. This is the command module you can see here, and it's being filmed from the the lunar module that's going to go down to the surface, or has in fact just come back up from the surface, and it's docking. Now this thing here is locked on. It's used as a sort of to assist in the docking process by giving the readout on the direction and closing rate of the LM. Now you watch. When I click, you'll see a moon pigeon, a UFO, flies between it and the moon's surface, and the high gain antenna, which is supposed to be helping to dock with the LM, suddenly breaks dock and starts following the UFO. You watch, it's incredible. You can see it again more slowly, and that's actually on the hi Chris, that's actually on the NASA website. You can watch that one. And again, whatever it is, it's in a low orbit over the moon's surface. So you have to say, what could it possibly be, and why has this thing achieved a hard lock on it? And even more, the astronauts aboard the this by the way, Apollo 10 wasn't a moon landing. It's where the command module, the lunar landing module, swooped down within 5 or 8 miles of the moon's surface, then came back up again. It was the one just before the Apollo 11. But this has got, the lunar module's got to dock with this, or they're stuck in space. And they were very concerned about staff were very concerned about losing the lot. This is just another very similar thing, just another object in low orbit around the moon below the command module. You can see it here. And well, what is it? It's far too low to be a little orbiting moon of the moon, as it were. And if you spend enough time looking at the NASA website, you'll find there's quite a lot of these videos, anomalous videos. One of the nicest of guys, unless you ask him the wrong questions, is Alan Bean, and he's very famous for being a gifted artist. And after he left the space program, after Skylab, he just retired. He spent all his time painting and became a very successful artist, as did the Apollo 11 command module pilot Michael Collins. Their paintings command hundreds of thousands of dollars. But this is again, it's that photograph there is of one of the. It was actually taken by one of the crew members of Skylab. Skylab was, after the Apollo program finished. You may know that they had planned for 3 more Apollo moon missions, Apollo 18, 19, 20, and additionally they had 2 further Saturn V Apollo spacecraft. And they, after, whether it's because they felt they didn't want to push their luck after Apollo 17 being so successful, or as some people have suggested, at that stage, they were warned off from going to the moon. I mean, I'm not saying I necessarily believe that. I'm just saying that it's a possibility that's very widely circulated. But for whatever reason, they cancelled, even though they'd spent the expensive money on the hardware, they cancelled the 3 final Apollo moon missions, which is a great shame as far as meteoriticists and geologists are concerned, because they were actually going to land on one of the rays of the crater Tycho. If they'd have done that, we'd have learned so much about the age of Tycho, when the massive major bombardments of the moon occurred, etc., etc. But they didn't do it. So what they had to do something with them instead. So they turned the top stage of the Saturn and the Apollo capsule into a thing called Skylab. Okay, and the Apollo spacecraft could then the remaining 3 spacecraft could then could dock with it and spend a very amount of time up there. They'd all alarms and problems. One of the solar arrays didn't extend. They found that they couldn't cool the thing down. They had to make a kind of parasol to stretch over it to keep it cool. But anyway, they photographed this, as you see, all three of us on Skylab 3 saw an apparently intelligent controlled vehicle. But I asked him about that, by which he meant it changed direction several times. So it wasn't just a piece of debris or anything. People often suggest the Black Knight thing was. And it actually, it led them in their orbit, and it was just ahead of them in their orbit, into the Earth's shadow, and they photographed it. And that photograph I've superimposed just for the purposes of this this presentation onto a photograph of Skylab. But he said, yeah, that's exactly that. You know, that's more or less what it would have looked like. It was that near to us, and it was. He said it looked like a Klingon hawk ship, is what he said it looked like. That's Alan Bean there, being very, very kind. I had some paintings of mine scattered around. He was really kind to me. But now, again, you're not going to be able to hear this, but it's online. It's Edgar Mitchell famously being interviewed on a British radio station back in 2011, and I had already met him in October, and he'd said that you know, I said to him, you know, you were born in Roswell, New Mexico. Did you know Jesse Marcel? He said, I knew Jesse Marcel Jr. To some extent. So we weren't friends, but I knew him, and I knew what his dad, you know, had done. He's a bit. I think Mitchell's a bit. I'm probably about the same age. Can't think about it. Anyway, so I said to him, "Do you believe in UFOs?" And he just, without, you know, batting an eyelid, he said, "Oh yeah, you know, I've got no personal experience of this," he said, "but I know I've heard it from people I trust and believe, and people in very high up in the program." He said, "I can tell you now that 4 species of extraterrestrials regularly visit the planet." And I was a bit taken aback, to say the least. That's the thing. It's the first of the Apollo guys I spoke to that actually said that. And I said, "Can you elaborate on it?" And he said, "Yeah, they're you know, after Roswell, when some in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold, then Roswell, and then various other things, Kecksburg and so on, and we know that a very similar event occurred in Russia. This you know, this relationship, this liaison with these 4 alien spacecraft." So then, after, you know, we chatted away about this, and he said, "Yeah, look, we've attained ever so much information and knowledge." He said, "I don't think Apollo would have been possible without the assistance of the EBEs, some of the EBEs." And he said, so I said to him, "Is anybody? Can you confirm any? I mean, is there anyone?" He said, "I'll tell you what." He said, "Do you do Skype?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Yeah. He said, "Oh, this guy Paul, you should talk to him. He knows a lot more about it than I do." And he gave me this number, and I Skyped the guy when we got back home after a couple of days, and this friendly-looking late middle-aged chap appears, and he said, "What can I do for you, eh?" So I said, "I've just been talking to Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Mitchell, and he's been talking to me about these 4 groups of aliens that occasionally visit the Earth." He said, "Oh, Edgar, maybe he's not, you know, as far into the loop as I am, or maybe he forgets stuff. I don't know, but it's not 4. It's more like 11 or 12." And I said, and I should say, "Who are you?" And he looked at me, you know, Skype, and he was really quite angry. "Do you mean, who am I?" I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "Well, then who are you?" So I said, "Well, I met Edgar several times. We, you know, we chat frequently." And he said, "So I'm Paul Hellyer, and until a couple of years ago, I was the Canadian Minister of Defence." But to say I was shocked. And after we chatted a bit, he said, "I've retired, and I think it's really important that." He also was an equerry to the Queen, by the way. And he said, I think it's time all this came out. I'm involved in a disclosure project, and you'll hear a lot more about it." He said, "But I'll tell you now," he said, "I'm sitting here in Canada, in Ottawa," and he said, "and within 100 kilometres, there's a community of 1,000 extraterrestrials living and working." And of course, it's very hard to accept, you know, but what's the guy going to gain by lying? And why would he lie? You know, he didn't know who I was at first when he was chatting away about this. but fascinating. And, you know, I spoke to him several times when I was writing one of my books, and, you know, a lot of what he said has been corroborated. Okay, now the Russians also have had similar experiences. This guy here is Salizan Sharapov. He was one of the very first cosmonauts I met back in the day, and he claimed this is when the Americans were joining the Russians for various joint missions aboard various space stations, Salyut and so on. But he was he was more interested in talking about this from the ISS, this sighting of the UFO, than he was in talking about his space missions, other space, you know, the general. I guess they must get fed up and sick and tired of talking about, you know, they always get asked the same question: can you go? How do you go to the toilet in space? I mean, you'd think if you'd waited and along years and spent a lot of money paid a lot of money to spend time with these guys, you'd think it was a bit more interesting to ask them. So, you know, but that's what people always ask, you know. But I asked him, you know, I said, it's a matter of record that you claim. And he said, as far as he's concerned, it was big, very, very big. And it reminded him of the famous UFO that was seen in America by thousands of people. I think it was Salt Lake City and various places. But as you said, it was huge, and he wasn't sure whether it was L-shaped, like you said, like a hockey stick. He wasn't sure whether it was half a dozen craft in flying in formation, or one large craft with bright lights on it. But when I was writing my book about the Apollo landings, one of the guys I got to have a nice dialogue with, again, sadly, he's passed away now, was a former astronaut, though he never actually flew in space. He probably would have flown on Apollo 18 or 19. He had been a professor of physics at Princeton, right? And, you know, not only did, when I asked him, you know, in an email about had he any, he had some fascinating data to give me about the Apollo programs, about the photography, and some strange anomalies in the historical record about that. But when I asked him about UFOs, I mean, you can all read, there's abundant evidence we're being contacted, that civilizations have been monitoring us for a long time. Blah, 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 blah. And then he then goes up, these visitors use the technologies. I don't understand this. He's the bloke who's a physics professor. I mean, toroid's a ring, isn't it? A wound ring. They use co-rotating magnetic disks for propulsion systems. That seems to be a common denominator. When I said, how do you know? Said, well, you know, these things are being back engineered at several locations in the United States and elsewhere, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, you know. And I wish I could have phoned him or Skyped him, but it was all my communication with him was always by email. Here's a fascinating character. And again, you know, don't forget, I'm not making any judgments about any of this. I'm just presenting it as it was presented to me. One of the astronauts, Mitchell, in fact, suggested I look into this guy and see if I can find. I never actually managed to talk to him directly by email or anything else, but I spoke to people who knew him and who had spent time with him. You may know that I've on several occasions met the base commander at Woodbridge or Bentwaters Air Base at the time of the Rendlesham UFO alleged landing. And Colonel Holt there was one of the guys who told me, it was suggested that I get to read this guy's book and listen to what he had to say, etc., etc. And he and Colonel Holt have collaborated in numerous big press conferences and stuff. But this Lieutenant Corso takes it all a stage further. He says, you know, and this is a fascinating book, you know, it really is. And is it a wonderful piece of disinformation? Is it to take your eye off the ball of what's really going on? Do you write it just for a piece of mischief? Or I will tell you this now: nobody makes any money out of writing books anymore, unless they're about, unless they're Shades of Grey or, you know, Lee Childs. But he claims that there's actually been a war in space, and this goes back to one of the things that Paul Hellyer said to me, which is that of the known races of EBs or alien races that are known, they're not all friendly. Because he had this specifically, I said to him, you know, why do you think it's important to talk about this now? And he said, we've lost planes in combat with them. You know, they're not all friendly. Some of them are hostile. And Corso's book, again, it's quite a difficult book to get hold of, but he says there's been a war in space for decades, and that some of the back engineering has not been on things that has not been information or technology that's been given to us. It's obtained from craft that we've actually shot down. This is a fascinating thing. This guy here has flown in space more than any other person. I think there might be a Russian who's equaled his record now. And he's Dr. Story Musgrave. He's one of the brightest people in the world. I mean, he's got 6 degrees, all maths, physics, you know, string theory, for God's sake. He's also an officer in the Marine Corps. He's like a Superman, really. And he at the time he retired, he'd flown 6 times. And, you know, in an interview in 1994, which you can see on 2 of my missions, and I don't have an answer, I've seen a snake. By the way, other people have seen these things too, not just him. And they're not small. I mean, we're talking about things that are many, many meters long, as we'll see in a second. He says it was rubbery. This chicken's rubbery because it had internal waves in it, and it followed you for a rather long period of time. And we're talking about something in space, you know, on the very edge of space, and it's a strange concept. He believes that UFOs, at least some of them, are actually alive. He says the more you fly in space, the more you see. Isn't that candid? And that sort of things bring to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. This is he videoed from one of the shuttle missions. Now this thing is the length of a cricket pitch. You know, so what on earth is it? Let's watch it again. There are several videos of these too. This is just the one. It's not actually that easy to download things anymore. So there we are. That's stories. And why this little? Are you all still okay? Still enjoying this? I'll carry on. Jolly good. The Russian Enigma. Why I've called it that is the Russian Enigma is quite straightforward. They built a rocket or designed a rocket. More. And a spacecraft, the Soyuz spacecraft, is still flying. Soyuz is still the method that the Americans use, you know, Elon Musk notwithstanding, to get the bulk of their astronauts up to the International Space Station since the shuttle was retired. The Soyuz was designed to be the Russian moon landing craft, okay? And the first guy to go to the moon on it was supposed to be another guy I've met. We'll see him in a minute. The enigma is, why didn't they go to the moon? This is Alexei Leonov, again, totally charming guy. And another one, after he retired, he spent all his time painting. He does a most beautiful kind of impressionist paintings of space and spacecraft and space travel. And he was one of those guys who just, there's absolutely no way he was going to break any confidences or step outside the party line. But all he said, he had some very, in his own mind, he just couldn't understand how it was that they couldn't get their N1 super booster rocket to work, you know, with a full fuel load when they managed to do it with the Saturn V. But he was quite candid that most space missions, Russian missions, or a great majority of Russian space missions encountered UFOs at some point. And he painted them. He used to paint them. Now this is something totally off the wall, totally unbelievable, involving 2 sets of cosmonauts on board the Salyut space station. Before there was the International Space Station, there was Skylab, the Russians had Salyut, and they had another one after. There have been various attempts, somebody's logged out, there's been various attempts at establishing a permanent space station. I'll just add one little interesting thing about this. Svetlana Savitskaya, she flew into space a couple of times. And I chatted to Leonov about her, and he said, and this is one of the crews on there. This is on that Svetlana Savitskaya there, and he said, really, the Americans wouldn't have done this, but when she was in space, the mission commander opens a packet and it says, part of your mission is to have regular sex with the other two, or with your two crewmates, to try and get pregnant. I mean, can you imagine that on an American spacecraft or on the ISS now? But she said, no, I won't do it. I'm here because I'm a pilot and a cosmonaut, and she refused to have anything to do with it. But on this particular mission, which was her first mission, you have to say it's a good thing she stood her ground and she got another mission. At one point, they saw that they were suddenly bathed by a bright light. Looking out the window, they saw what they described as 7 giant, they said, angels. And they said that they were quite candid about it. These were what's the word for it? They were sentient. They had intelligent looking faces. They were looking in the window at them. And what are we supposed to make of this? It happened on 2 separate occasions aboard the Salyut space station, that these things, and of course the usual response that people will give is that they'd inhaled some kind of toxin or something, but in total, a total of 9 cosmonauts observed these through the window of the spacecraft. So what we make of it. Popovich was one of the first. Again, remember, I'm just taking you through some examples of what astronauts and cosmonauts have said. I'm not making any value judgments. I'm not making any too many conclusions. I just thought you'd like to see what the story is. I've never met Popovich. I did, however, email his wife, his widow, on several occasions. I actually got a book. She actually sent me a book, but I can't read it because it's in German, unfortunately, which is all about UFOs. That's all it's about. Anyway, he was one of the very first Vostok cosmonauts back in the early 60s, after Gagarin. There was 6 of them, and I think it was Gagarin, Titov, Popovich, then Nikolai. I think he was the 3rd Russian in space. Anyway, he wouldn't in public talk about, although apparently his wife says he saw him in space as well. But he did. He has on record stated he saw an obvious artificial UFO, a construct, from an aircraft he was flying back from America. They used to have these cosmonaut meetings where the American astronauts and cosmonauts and space scientists would all get together and have a good old jolly up for a week. It was coming back from one of those. His widow, she amazingly, I mean, they refer to, as it says here, to the Chuck Yeager of Russia. She holds so many international flight records, altitude, duration, greatest height somebody ever parachuted from until that guy did it, the Swiss guy. Everything, and she is a great proponent of the UFO hypothesis, or phenomenon, and she firmly believes in it, and she's happy to talk about it to anybody at any time. And in emails and publicly at talks and in emails to me and in books, these are some of the most astonishing things. She said that Russian satellites have taken many photographs of flying saucers. Incredible, Russian scientists have concluded that flying saucers have been around for as long as our planet. In other words, that they're a much older civilization than ours. and that she has personally seen photographs of alien-human hybrids. Well, there's no way of testing that. I'm just reporting to you what this famous woman told me and has told other people. We're getting towards the end now. I hope you're still enjoying this. You may remember a guy who was a bit of a poor character in many ways. He was autistic, an autistic guy, and a bit like Rain Man. He had phenomenal intuitive and mathematical powers, or particularly to do with IT. And he broke into the NASA and several regions of the US, of the Pentagon's computer system. And it's fascinating how he did it. He figured nobody's going to, he's interested in UFOs, but he thought, well, nobody's going to, there's no way you're going to find the codes. It's never going to be easy to break into sort of top secret technology or war strategy or anything like that. And so he thought, well, the one thing that should be quite easy to get a back door to get into is to look at their salary statements and accounts. And that's what he did. And you might remember that the Americans, when they found out that he published all this that he discovered on, I think, probably Facebook, and various online forums, the Americans spent ages trying to get him extradited to the United States to stand trial. And amazingly, it was Theresa May, when she was who interceded and wouldn't let them have him. But he found a document, as it says here, listing status and salaries of non-terrestrial officers, and it had their service times, and there were, very now. And as it said, there's also ranks, names, etc. Another sheet had tabs of material transfer between ships. When you look the ships up, they're not naval ships, and they're not any of that, and they don't occur in any of the normal conventional lists of naval craft. And the conclusion he came to, which is not, bear in mind this is secret information that he's hacked into, and it seems quite a reasonable thing to suggest that these were part of a covert non-terrestrial US. And you go back to Lieutenant Colonel Corso, the guy said that actually has been a war waged between us and some friendly EBs and some EBs that are not friendly, some hostile or inimical ones. This maybe fits in with that. Maybe these non-terrestrial officers are aliens assisting us in this combat, or maybe they're just, as an example, this here you can see is a Gemini capsule, and you think, well, what's this then? For many years, the American Air Force had a covert parallel space program. This is called the MOL, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory. Okay, and that was, people often say about the Apollo things, how could you keep this and that secret? This was kept secret for 30 years. It's actually what its intention was, and its scope, and the scale of the program. And it was launched from Vandenberg, or it would have been launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base. In theory, the program was cancelled about the time that the Apollo program has been allegedly the object of this, and the uprated launch facility at Edwards and Vandenberg. The object was to spy on the Russians. Had enormous satellites, enormous photographic equipment aboard. But I mean, Corso and others have claimed it was merely part of this if you like, this extraterrestrial link or arm of the American Armed Forces. And we're right at the end now of this presentation, but the Chinese have had a brief flurry of their astronauts are called taikonauts. So we've got astronauts, cosmonauts, and taikonauts. I mean, I have to say, there's a lot of sensible, serious people have come up with some very serious questions about whether or not the Chinese have actually ever put anybody in space or not. But let's assume they have. But their spacecraft called Shenzhou, how you'd say that. three missions, their Taikonauts reported somebody banging on the hatch on the outside. And this guy here is the only one. He said it happened on several occasions. And although, you know, he said the received wisdom, it was the metal fabric of the spacecraft expanding, contracting. As you undoubtedly know, if you're exposed to the sun, it's 100 degrees Celsius. If you're on the other side in the shadow, it's you know, minus 200 near enough Celsius. So you've got this tremendous thermal disparity, you know, and that's what the Chinese claim these bangs are. But he said they were rhythmic banging, you know, it was like, you know, haircut and shave 2 bits sort of thing. But there we are. Okay, stop the share.